On the morning of December 7, 1941, the rising sun did not just mark another day in the Pacific. To the Japanese pilots approaching Oahu, it was the beginning of a mission they had been told would reshape history. From their cockpits, the island of Hawaii looked deceptively calm. Green hills, quiet waters, and a harbor filled with American ships resting at anchor. For the men of Japan's first air fleet, this calm was an illusion they were about to shatter. As they descended, they carried with them the weight of secrecy that had silenced their tongues for weeks. None could speak of the journey across the ocean. None could confide their doubts even to friends. Now engines roared as torpedoes and bombs were armed. Many of the pilots, still in their 20s, whispered brief prayers. Some believed they were on a path of honor. Others silently feared that America's awakening would be far more dangerous than their leaders admitted. From the Japanese perspective, the scene below was shocking, not for its defenses, but for the absence of them. No alarm sirens wailed, no fighter planes scrambled into the skies. Battleships sat motionless, smoke curling from breakfast kitchens on shore. One pilot later recalled thinking it was like striking a sleeping giant with an axe. Then, in an instant, tranquility turned to chaos. The first torpedo cut through the water, leaving a silver trail that ended in fire. Bombs followed, the harbor erupting into smoke and flame. Through their eyes, it seemed almost too easy, as though fate itself had cleared the skies for them. Yet beneath the roar of victory lay an unease. Had they truly struck a crippling blow, or had they just awakened something far greater than they could imagine? To understand Pearl Harbor through Japanese eyes, one must first see the walls closing in around them. In the late 1930s, Japan had embarked on a path of expansion across Asia, seizing territory and resources to fuel its empire. But this rapid growth came at a price. Western powers, alarmed by Japan's aggression, tightened economic restrictions. By 1941, America had cut off vital supplies of oil, steel, and rubber, the lifeblood of modern warfare. Without oil, Japan's ships would stall in the water, its planes would sit idle on runways, and its empire would grind to a halt. Inside Tokyo's war councils, the mood was grim. Diplomats argued for negotiations, but military leaders insisted that time was running out. Each passing month brought Japan closer to collapse. The U.S. Pacific Fleet, anchored at Pearl Harbor, was not only a symbol of American power, but a direct obstacle to Japanese dominance in the Pacific. From the Japanese perspective, striking that fleet was not reckless, it was survival. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the plan, understood the gamble. He famously warned that Japan could run wild for 6 months, but beyond that, America's vast industrial might would become unstoppable. Still, others around him believed a single decisive blow could shatter American morale and force Washington to negotiate peace on Japan's terms. This tension between fear and bold ambition drove the decision. To the Japanese public, the attack would be presented as a heroic strike, an act of destiny. But behind closed doors, leaders knew they were rolling dice against an opponent with deeper pockets and longer endurance. For the young men preparing to fly into Pearl Harbor, it meant that every bomb dropped, every torpedo launched, carried the burden of a nation fighting for its very existence. Far from the blazing skies of Pearl Harbor, the origins of the attack began in quiet, smoke-filled rooms in Tokyo. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the Imperial Japanese Navy, was no stranger to America. He had studied at Harvard, traveled its railways, and even toured its factories. He understood its strengths better than many of his peers. That knowledge made him both the most unlikely architect of Pearl Harbor and the only man bold enough to push the plan forward. Yamamoto's war room was a place of tension. Maps of the Pacific covered the walls, pins marking the reach of the U.S. fleet. Charts of oil reserves, shipping routes, and industrial capacity told a story that terrified Japanese strategists. America's production dwarfed Japan's by every measure. For Yamamoto, this reality was not a distant possibility, but a looming certainty. Unless Japan struck first, it would eventually be crushed. Yet Yamamoto was no warmonger. Privately, he opposed war with America, writing letters to friends where he admitted he saw little hope of victory in a prolonged conflict. But as Japan tightened its grip on Southeast Asia and the U.S. responded with embargoes, the military government pressed him for solutions. His answer was drastic: cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet in one swift strike, seize territory, and negotiate from a position of strength before America could recover.
Inside the war room, officers debated fiercely. Some believed the plan was too risky, too ambitious. Others argued it was the only path left. The room itself echoed with both confidence and dread. Yamamoto, calm and deliberate, listened to each voice. When silence fell, he laid out his conviction. If war with the United States was inevitable, then Japan must deliver a knockout blow at the very beginning. This decision was not simply military, it was cultural. Japanese honor demanded boldness. To retreat without striking would be seen as weakness. Yamamoto, though reluctant, carried the weight of this cultural expectation as much as the strategy itself. Every pin on his map represented not just ships or planes, but the lives of men who would follow orders into fire. In that dimly lit war room, amid tobacco smoke and whispered doubts, a course was set that would ignite the Pacific in flames. While Yamamoto and his staff refined the plan, another group bore the weight of secrecy in silence: the pilots. Young men from across Japan had been selected for a mission so secret that even among themselves they spoke in guarded whispers. Orders were vague at first: extra training, extended drills, unusual simulations, but none were told outright where or why they would soon fly. The code of silence was absolute. To speak of it outside approved channels could mean dishonor, disgrace, even death.
Their training was unlike anything they had known. Standard bombing runs gave way to low-altitude torpedo practices, where pilots skimmed dangerously close to the water. This was no accident. Pearl Harbor was shallow, its harbor floor expected to snag traditional torpedoes. Japanese engineers had devised wooden stabilizers to keep the weapons from diving too deep, and the pilots were tasked with mastering their release with deadly precision. Hour after hour, they repeated these maneuvers, pushing themselves to the edge of fatigue. Some pilots felt pride at being chosen for what was whispered to be a historic operation. Others carried quiet dread, unsure if they would ever return. The secrecy only magnified their unease. They could not write home about their mission, could not confide in friends or family. For weeks, their world shrank to barracks, airfields, and the endless rhythm of engines and sea spray. At night, speculation filled the silence. Some guessed they were preparing for an attack on British colonies. Others suspected the Philippines. Few dared to imagine they would be striking America directly. Yet the intensity of their training hinted at something extraordinary. Every maneuver, every lesson, carried the weight of destiny.
The 6 Japanese aircraft carriers slipped through the vast Pacific like ghosts, their presence undetectable, and their purpose known only to a few. For days, the convoy moved in near-perfect silence. Radios were minimal. Ships maintained strict blackout protocols, and even routines were carefully monitored to avoid leaving a trace. To the men aboard, the ocean seemed endless, a gray expanse that tested both patience and nerves. Every wave against the hull, every distant bird, was magnified in their heightened awareness. Pilots and crew alike lived in a tense balance between monotony and alertness. Days blended into nights under the oppressive heat and humidity. Training drills were repeated mid-journey to keep skills sharp, yet always under the weight of secrecy. Sailors whispered about the mission, but never in full clarity. Some guessed at distant battles, some feared impossible odds. The truth, that they were approaching the greatest naval strike of the century, was a weight that none could fully bear until the last moment. Even among the officers, unease simmered. Yamamoto had planned meticulously, yet the ocean offered no guarantees. Any detection by American patrols could compromise the entire operation. The men were aware that they were threading a needle across thousands of miles of hostile waters, relying not on luck, but on precision, timing, and absolute discipline. From the Japanese perspective, this journey was more than a movement of ships. It was a test of endurance, loyalty, and mental fortitude. Each day brought them closer to the unknown, closer to the moment when decades of training, secrecy, and strategy would converge in a single historic strike. And all the while, the vast Pacific seemed to whisper of the danger ahead, a silent observer to the mission that could decide the fate of nations.
Night fell over the Pacific, and aboard the carriers, a strange hush settled over the decks. The pilots, who had spent weeks preparing for what they knew was an unprecedented mission, now faced the silence of anticipation. In their bunks, some wrote in private diaries, pouring out thoughts they could never speak aloud. Each entry revealed a mix of pride, anxiety, and a quiet sense of destiny that weighed heavily on young shoulders. Some pilots expressed exhilaration at being chosen for history, believing their actions could bring honor to their families and their nation. Others admitted to fear of failing, fear of never returning, fear of the unimaginable destruction they were about to unleash. The diaries captured moments of humanity rarely seen in history books, a longing for home, the pangs of loneliness, and the strange calm that comes from knowing one's fate is sealed by orders beyond personal control. Conversations in the mess hall were subdued, often punctuated by nervous laughter or quiet glances at the open sea. Officers reminded men to rest, yet sleep was elusive. Dreams were invaded by images of looming targets, roaring engines, and explosions they had practiced for countless hours. Some whispered prayers, while others silently recited instructions to memorize every maneuver, every timing, every formation. From the Japanese viewpoint, the night before the attack was as much a battle as the strike itself. Discipline clashed with fear. Courage wrestled with doubt, and the weight of duty pressed down on every man. They were poised on the edge of history, carrying with them the hopes of a nation, the weight of their own mortality, and the uncertain outcome of a mission that would forever alter the Pacific. The dawn would bring not just action, but consequences they could neither fully predict nor control.
At first light on December 7th, the Japanese pilots soared over Oahu, the island bathed in the soft glow of sunrise. From above, the harbor looked peaceful, almost serene, but the tranquility was a deceptive veil. Below them, the U.S. Pacific Fleet lay scattered across Pearl Harbor, unready for the storm about to descend. The pilots gripped their controls tightly, engines humming like predators closing in on prey. The first wave descended with precision honed over countless hours of training. Torpedo planes skimmed just above the water, bombs secured and ready. Dive bombers climbed in perfect formation,
shadows stretching over battleships as they prepared to strike. From their perspective, the sight was awe-inspiring and terrifying. Ships glinting in the morning sun, smoke rising from port facilities, the vast expanse of the harbor, a stage for destruction. As the Japanese planes released their payloads, the harbor erupted in fire and smoke. Explosions tore through decks, sending twisted metal and water into the air. Pilots reported seeing columns of flame and plumes of black smoke rising from vessels that had seemed untouchable. The sound of shells and burning fuel mixed with the roar of engines, creating a chaotic symphony of war that would be seared into memory.
Yet, even in the midst of apparent success, pilots sensed the unpredictable. Anti-aircraft fire began to pepper the skies, tracer rounds streaking through the morning light. Some bombs missed their targets, plunging into shallow water harmlessly. Others struck perfectly, sending ships listing and sinking, crews scrambling in panic. The Japanese pilots experienced a mix of triumph and unease, knowing that while the initial strike was devastating, the full outcome of the attack and the American response remained uncertain. From their vantage point, Oahu transformed from a peaceful harbor into a theater of chaos, a moment in time where strategy, skill, and fortune collided. Each man understood the gravity of his actions. This was no ordinary mission. They were the instruments of a nation's bold gamble, witnessing firsthand the shock they were inflicting on an unprepared enemy, while sensing, even amidst victory, the shadow of consequences that would follow. From the Japanese perspective, the scene below was almost surreal. Battleships and cruisers rested at anchor, seemingly unaware of the danger approaching above. Sailors were beginning their morning routines, some in mess halls, others on deck performing routine maintenance. The island was alive with mundane activity, entirely unprepared for the storm that would soon engulf them. To the pilots, it was as if time itself had slowed, presenting a rare, fleeting opportunity to strike without resistance. The first torpedoes hit with devastating precision. Ships rocked violently as explosions tore through their hulls. Smoke and flames leapt into the sky, mingling with the shrill cries of men scrambling for cover. In the Japanese eyes, this chaos was almost hypnotic. Battleships, once symbols of American might, reduced to smoldering wrecks in minutes. Pilots marveled at the apparent ease, yet beneath the triumph lay a creeping sense of tension. Every missed bomb, every unexpected burst of anti-aircraft fire reminded them that perfection was never guaranteed. Japanese observers noted the Americans' confusion. Commanders shouted orders, sailors abandoned stations, and harried anti-aircraft crews tried to respond without coordination. From above, it was a spectacle of vulnerability, a stark contrast to the pride and discipline often associated with the U.S. Navy. It was a moment that underscored both the brilliance and audacity of Japan's planning. Yet, amidst the destruction, the Japanese pilots also sensed imperfection. Some torpedoes missed shallow targets, bombs struck empty decks, and fires were controlled by quick-thinking crews. Even in this moment of overwhelming advantage, the unpredictability of war reminded them that luck, skill, and chance were inseparable. As the first wave of Japanese aircraft roared back toward their carriers to rearm, the pilots began to sense that the mission was far from flawless. While the initial devastation had been remarkable, cracks in the operation were emerging, small, yet potentially catastrophic. Anti-aircraft fire, once sporadic, had grown more coordinated as American crews regained composure. Flak bursts shred the sky, forcing pilots to adjust maneuvers mid-flight, a dangerous challenge at high speeds and low altitudes. From the Japanese perspective, the calm that had cloaked Pearl Harbor was giving way to unpredictable resistance. Ships that had seemed helpless now moved to defend themselves, launching whatever ordnance they could. Pilots reported narrowly avoiding collisions with debris, navigating through clouds of smoke, fire, and shrapnel. The air, once a canvas for precision and control, had become chaotic, a theater of uncertainty where skill alone might not suffice. At the same time, the human cost became starkly apparent. Flames engulfed decks. Sailors jumped into the harbor in desperation, and cries of fear and confusion echoed across the water. For the Japanese pilots, witnessing this destruction brought mixed emotions, a sense of awe at the effectiveness of their training, pride in executing a daring strike, and unease at the unfolding human tragedy. This mid-strike reality underscored the unpredictable nature of warfare. From the Japanese viewpoint, what had begun as a meticulously planned operation was now a test of improvisation, courage, and judgment. Every decision, every maneuver in the skies above Oahu carried consequences not only for the mission's outcome, but for the men below, the sailors who had become unwitting participants in history's largest surprise attack. As the Japanese pilots returned to their carriers, the air was thick with a mixture of triumph and uncertainty. From above, the devastation at Pearl Harbor was undeniable. Smoke rose from battleships, fires consumed docks, and chaos had ruled the harbor. Many pilots felt exhilaration at having executed a plan that few believed possible. Cheers erupted among crews on deck, celebrating the apparent success of the strike.
Yet, beneath the celebration, a subtle tension lingered. Pilots and officers alike were aware of what had not been destroyed. The vital oil storage facilities remained largely intact. Carriers had not been present in the harbor, and much of the American industrial capacity was untouched. For some, the elation of immediate success was tempered by a dawning realization. The mission's strategic objective might not have been fully achieved. Questions swirled quietly. Had they delivered a knockout blow or merely a stunning first act in a much longer conflict? Yamamoto himself was both proud and wary. The mission had been executed with precision, yet he knew that the American response would soon come. In private, he reflected on the enormous industrial power of the United States, a force that could recover and retaliate faster than most in Japan realized. For the men aboard the carriers, these thoughts were often unspoken, buried under layers of discipline and pride. Back in Tokyo, the atmosphere was electric. News of the attack spread rapidly, filling the streets and airwaves with jubilation. Citizens cheered, waving flags and celebrating what they believed was a decisive victory over a formidable enemy. Newspapers hailed the strike as a masterpiece of strategy, a testament to Japanese ingenuity and courage. For many, it was a moment of national pride that confirmed the empire's strength and destiny. Yet beneath the celebrations, Admiral Yamamoto harbored deep unease. He understood the larger picture that the public could not see. The industrial might of the United States, capable of producing ships, planes, and weapons at an almost limitless pace. He feared that Pearl Harbor, while tactically brilliant, might ultimately galvanize America rather than cripple it. Victory had been achieved in the short term, but the long-term consequences were uncertain, and the stakes of miscalculation were enormous. In private meetings, Yamamoto spoke cautiously, weighing the risks of prolonged conflict. Unlike the jubilant public, he recognized that the U.S. could respond with a level of force and speed that Japan could not match indefinitely. The attack, brilliant as it was, carried the seeds of future struggle, a reality that only the most experienced military leaders could comprehend. For Japanese citizens, however, these concerns were invisible. The air was filled with celebration, songs, and patriotic fervor. For the pilots who returned from the mission, there was a mixture of pride and quiet reflection, aware that their actions had set a chain of events into motion far beyond their control. The contrast between national jubilation and Yamamoto's private anxiety highlighted the complex reality of war. Triumph and fear, hope and foreboding often existed side by side, shaping the decisions and destinies of both leaders and ordinary soldiers alike. The shockwaves of Pearl Harbor rippled far beyond the Pacific. From the Japanese perspective, the attack had been a masterstroke, precision, surprise, and the demonstration of daring skill. Ships burned, explosions echoed across the harbor, and America had been caught unprepared. Yet even as the pilots and commanders reveled in their perceived triumph, a darker truth loomed. They had awakened a giant. The United States, previously reluctant to engage fully in the war, now faced a national call to arms. Factories that had once produced consumer goods were quickly converted into arsenals of war. Shipyards and airfields operated around the clock, training waves of soldiers and sailors ready to strike back. Yamamoto's private fears materialized almost immediately. The American response would be swift, overwhelming, and sustained. From the Japanese viewpoint, the initial glory of the attack was tempered by a growing awareness of the consequences. They had achieved tactical brilliance, but the strategic gamble was immense. The blow that had stunned the United States also ignited its determination, setting into motion a series of events that would challenge Japan in ways no one had anticipated. Victory had a cost, and the seeds of a long, grueling conflict were sown in the smoke and fire of that early December morning.